The tornado warning came 30 minutes before Willa Catherine was supposed to walk down the aisle, and she refused to believe it would actually hit Jamestown, California, on the one day she had planned every detail down to the last ribbon on the church pews. The sky had turned an ugly shade of green that morning in late May of 1884, but Willa had dismissed the concerned murmurs of the townspeople as they decorated the small wooden church on Main Street. Her fiancé, Thomas Whitmore, had barely looked at the threatening clouds when he arrived with his groomsmen, more interested in the flask of whiskey they were passing around behind the general store. Willa had felt a knot in her stomach when she saw him stumble slightly, but she pushed it away. This was her wedding day. Everything was supposed to be perfect. The wind picked up as she stood in the back room of the church, her mother fussing with the veil that had belonged to her grandmother. The delicate lace felt heavy against Willa's dark hair, and she could see through the small window how the trees were bending in ways that made her chest tighten. "Maybe we should wait," her mother said quietly, her fingers trembling as she adjusted the pearl buttons on Willa's white dress. "We are not waiting," Willa said firmly, though her voice shook. "I have waited 3 years for Thomas to propose and another year planning this wedding. A little wind is not going to ruin this day." But it was not just a little wind. The church door flew open suddenly, and Sheriff Morrison burst in, his hat clutched in his weathered hands. "Everyone needs to get to shelter now. There's a twister coming straight through, and it's a big one." The church erupted in chaos. Women grabbed their children, men shouted directions, and Willa stood frozen in the middle of it all, her white dress suddenly feeling like a costume for a play that had been canceled. She looked around wildly for Thomas, but he was nowhere to be seen. His groomsmen were pushing toward the door, and one of them called back, "Thomas already headed to his family's cellar on the east side." The words hit Willa harder than any wind could. He had left. Her groom had abandoned her without a word, without even checking if she was safe. The humiliation burned through her chest as people rushed past, their concern for survival overriding any attention to the abandoned bride standing in the center of the church. "Miss Catherine, you need to move right now." The voice was unfamiliar, deep, and urgent. Willa turned to find a cowboy she had seen around town but never spoken to. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of strong coffee. His hat was pulled low, but she could see the intensity in his gaze as he grabbed her arm gently but firmly. "I can't just leave," Willa said, though even as she spoke, the windows rattled in their frames and she heard something crash outside. "You can, and you will," the cowboy said. His name was Emmett Pierce, she remembered now. He worked at the Patterson Ranch outside town, breaking horses and herding cattle. He was known for keeping to himself, for being reliable and honest, but not much else. "The nearest shelter is the old storm cellar behind the boarding house. It's close. We can make it if we go now." Another window shattered, and Willa felt her resistance crumble. She gathered her skirts in trembling hands and let Emmett guide her toward the door. The moment they stepped outside, the full force of the storm hit them. The wind was so strong it nearly knocked Willa off her feet, and if not for Emmett's strong arm around her waist, she would have fallen. Rain lashed at them horizontally, soaking through her dress in seconds. The beautiful white fabric clung to her legs, making it difficult to run. "Don't stop!" Emmett shouted over the roar of the wind. "Keep moving!" Willa could barely see through the rain and her veil, which had come loose and was whipping around her face. She tore at it frantically, and Emmett helped her pull it free. It flew away immediately, a white ghost disappearing into the gray chaos. Debris flew past them, pieces of wood and metal that could kill if they made contact. Emmett kept his body between her and the worst of it, taking a hit from something that made him grunt in pain, but he did not slow down. The boarding house appeared through the sheets of rain, and behind it, the old storm cellar doors were already open. Mrs. Henderson, who owned the boarding house, was waving frantically from the doorway of the cellar. "Hurry! Hurry!" They stumbled down the steps, and Emmett immediately turned to pull the heavy doors closed behind them. The wind fought him, trying to rip the doors from his hands, but he braced his boots against the earthen floor and hauled with all his strength. The doors slammed shut with a finality that made Willa's ears ring, and Emmett quickly secured the latch. The cellar was dim, lit only by 2 oil lamps Mrs. Henderson had brought down. There were about a dozen other people already there, pressed against the earthen walls and sitting on crates of preserved food. Everyone was soaked and frightened, and the sound of the storm above them was like a living thing, a monster trying to claw its way in. Willa sank onto a barrel, her legs finally giving out. Her wedding dress was ruined, stained with mud and torn at the hem. Her hair hung in wet ropes down her back, and she could not stop shaking. The reality of what had happened crashed over her all at once. Her wedding was destroyed. Thomas had abandoned her. She had nearly died. Emmett crouched down in front of her, his face etched with concern. "Are you hurt anywhere?" Willa shook her head, though she was not entirely sure. Everything felt numb. "My wedding," she whispered, and then to her horror she started to cry. Not delicate tears, but harsh, gasping sobs that shook her entire body. Mrs. Henderson hurried over with a blanket, wrapping it around Willa's shoulders, even though it would do little good against the wet dress. "There now, dear. You are safe. That is what matters." But it did not feel like what mattered. Willa had spent a year planning this day, had sewn her dress by hand, had saved every penny from her job at the schoolhouse to afford the flowers and the cake and the small reception, and Thomas had just left her there, had not even looked back. Emmett stood and moved to give her space, but Willa found herself reaching out, her hand catching his sleeve. "Thank you," she managed through her tears. "You saved my life." His expression softened, and he gave a small nod. "Could not leave you standing there in a church about to be torn apart." Above them the storm raged on. The cellar shook with the force of the wind, and several times they heard crashes that sounded like buildings collapsing. The children in the cellar cried, and their mothers held them close, whispering reassurances that no one quite believed. Time lost all meaning in the darkness. It could have been 20 minutes or 2 hours. Willa found herself watching Emmett as he moved around the cellar, checking on people, making sure everyone was as comfortable as possible. He found extra blankets in a trunk and distributed them to the children first. When old Mr. Cooper started having trouble breathing, Emmett stayed by his side, keeping him calm until his breath steadied. There was a quiet strength to him, a steadiness that was completely different from Thomas's loud bravado. She realized with a start that she had never seen Thomas help anyone but himself. Oh, he talked a good game about being a provider, about how his father's lumber business would ensure they had a comfortable life. But she could not recall a single moment when he had put someone else's needs before his own. "Why did you come back for me?" Willa asked suddenly. Emmett was sitting on a crate near her now, and he looked up at her question. "What do you mean?" "Everyone else was running for safety. You came into the church specifically to get me out." She pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "Why?" Emmett was quiet for a long moment, and in the lamplight, she could see him considering his words carefully. "Saw your groom and his friends running past me on the street. Asked where you were. They said you were still in the church." His jaw tightened. No man should leave his bride behind to face danger alone. Figured if he would not go back for you, someone should. The simple honesty of his words made Willa's throat tight again. "You do not even know me." "Know enough," Emmett said. "Know you teach the children in town. Know you brought food to the Patterson ranch when Mrs. Patterson was sick last winter. Know you are not the kind of person who deserves to be left behind." Before Willa could respond, the sound of the storm suddenly changed. The roar diminished, the shaking stopped, and an eerie quiet fell over the cellar. Everyone held their breath, waiting to see if it was truly over or just the eye of the storm. After several long minutes, Emmett cautiously unlatched the cellar doors and pushed them open. Late afternoon sunlight streamed in, weak and watery, but sunlight nonetheless. He climbed up the steps and looked around, then came back down. His face was grim. "It's bad," he said simply. "The church is gone. Most of Main Street is damaged, but the storm has passed." People began to file out slowly, emerging into a landscape that looked like it belonged in a nightmare. Buildings were reduced to piles of lumber, trees were uprooted and scattered like matchsticks, and personal belongings were strewn everywhere, unrecognizable in their destruction. Someone's piano sat in the middle of the street, crushed by a beam. A child's doll hung from what remained of the telegraph pole. Willa climbed out of the cellar and turned in a slow circle, trying to comprehend the destruction. The church where she was supposed to have been married was nothing but kindling now. If Emmett had not come for her, if she had insisted on staying just a few minutes longer, she would be dead. "Willa!" Her mother came running from the direction of their house on the edge of town. Her face streaked with tears. She grabbed Willa and held her so tightly it hurt. "Thank God. Thank God you are safe." "Is our house?" Willa could not finish the question. "Standing. Damaged, but standing. Your father is already starting repairs." Her mother pulled back and looked at Willa's ruined dress, her muddy face, and fresh tears spilled over. "Oh, my darling, your beautiful wedding." Willa felt strangely disconnected from the loss. Perhaps it was shock, or perhaps it was the growing realization that the wedding she had wanted so desperately might have been a mistake all along. "Where is Thomas?" Her mother's face hardened in a way Willa had never seen before. "The Whitmore family cellar was untouched. Thomas and his family are all perfectly safe." She did not say more, but the disgust in her voice spoke volumes. Over the next few days, Jamestown pulled together in the way small towns do after a disaster. People shared food and shelter, worked together to clear debris and start rebuilding. 5 people had died in the tornado, including Mrs. Patterson from the ranch where Emmett worked. The funerals were somber affairs, reminders of how fragile life truly was. Willa threw herself into helping where she could. The schoolhouse had been damaged but not destroyed, and she spent long hours salvaging books and supplies, scrubbing mud from the floors, helping to repair the roof. Emmett was often there too, along with other men from town, doing the heavy work that needed to be done. She found herself acutely aware of him in a way she had not been aware of anyone before. The way he listened when people talked, really listened. His full attention on them. The way he worked tirelessly without complaint, even when she could see he was exhausted. The way he looked at her when he thought she was not paying attention, his eyes full of something she was afraid to name. Thomas came to see her 3 days after the tornado. He arrived at her damaged house with a bouquet of slightly wilted flowers and an explanation that sounded rehearsed. "I panicked," he said, standing in the doorway because Willa's father refused to let him inside. "The storm was so sudden and I just ran. I thought you were right behind me." "You did not check," Willa said quietly. She was surprised by how calm she felt, how little anger or hurt remained. Mostly, she just felt tired. "You did not even look back to see if I was safe." "I know, and I am sorry. I made a terrible mistake." Thomas reached for her hand, but she stepped back. "But we can reschedule the wedding. Once the town is rebuilt, we can try again. My father has already said he will pay for everything." "No." Thomas blinked. "What?" "No," Willa repeated more firmly this time. "I do not want to reschedule. I do not want to marry you, Thomas." His face went through several emotions: surprise, confusion, and then anger. "You are upset, and you have every right to be, but you cannot just throw away 3 years because of one mistake." "It was not one mistake," Willa said, and as she spoke, she realized how true it was. "It was the final mistake in a long pattern I chose not to see. You have always put yourself first. I have made excuses for it, told myself it was confidence or ambition, but it is selfishness. When the moment came when I truly needed you, Lee, you were not there. Someone else had to risk his life to save mine. You mean the ranch hand? Thomas's lip curled. Emmett Pierce? Is that what this is about? You're going to throw me over for some drifter who breaks horses for a living? Willa's father stepped forward then, his voice hard as iron. That ranch hand showed more honor and decency in one afternoon than you have shown in 3 years, Whitmore. Now get off my property before I throw you off. Thomas left in a fury, and Willa knew the story would be all over town by nightfall. She should have cared about the gossip, about what people would say about the broken engagement, but she found she could not muster the energy to worry about it. A week after the tornado, the town held a gathering in the evening at the one building that had survived completely intact, the saloon, ironically enough. But the owner, a practical woman named Sarah, had offered it as a community space until other buildings could be repaired. There was food donated from farms that had been spared, music from a fiddle player whose instrument had miraculously survived, and a determination to celebrate life in the face of destruction. Willa went because her mother insisted, and because staying in the damaged house staring at the walls was driving her quietly mad. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair pulled back in a practical bun, and she slipped in quietly, hoping not to draw attention. But people wanted to talk to her, wanted to tell her how sorry they were about the wedding, how brave she was for calling off the engagement with Thomas, how they had always known he was not good enough for her. The attention was overwhelming. And after an hour, Willa slipped out the back door into the cool night air. She found Emmett there, leaning against the wall, looking up at the stars. He glanced over when she emerged and straightened slightly. Getting stuffy in there? Something like that, Willa said. Willa? She moved to stand beside him, leaving a respectable distance between them. I wanted to thank you properly. I do not think I did before. You saved my life, Emmett. You thanked me fine, he said, but there was a hint of warmth in his voice. Still, I owe you a debt I can never repay. Emmett turned to look at her fully then, and in the moonlight his features were softer somehow, younger. She realized with a start that he could not be much older than her own 22 years. You do not owe me anything. I did what any decent person would do. Except my fiancé did not do it, Willa said bitterly. My former fiancé, I should say. Heard you broke it off. Whole town is talking about it. He paused. For what it is worth, I think you made the right choice. You do? A man who would leave you to face danger alone is not a man who deserves you, Emmett said simply. You deserve someone who will stand beside you when things get hard, not run away. Willa felt her breath catch. And I suppose you are that kind of man? The question came out more forward than she had intended, and she felt her cheeks heat with embarrassment. But Emmett did not seem offended. Instead, he took a careful step closer. I would like to be, he said quietly, if you would let me. You barely know me, Willa whispered, even as her heart raced. Then let me get to know you. Emmett's hand came up slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and gently touched her cheek. Let me court you properly. No rushing, no pressure, just a chance to see if this thing I have been feeling since I saw you standing in that church, looking lost and scared and still somehow strong, is real. You have been feeling something? Willa asked, hardly daring to believe it. Since before the tornado, if I am being honest, Emmett admitted. Used to see you walking to the schoolhouse in the mornings when I would come into town for supplies. Always wanted to say hello, but figured a school teacher would have no interest in a cowboy who smells like horses most days. Willa laughed, a real laugh that felt like it released something tight in her chest. I like the smell of horses. Well, then I am in luck. Emmett was smiling now, really smiling, and it transformed his usually serious face into something warm and open. They stood there in the moonlight, and Willa felt the world shift around her. Everything she had planned, everything she had thought she wanted was gone. But maybe that was not a tragedy. Maybe it was an opportunity, a chance to choose something real instead of something expected. Yes, she said finally. Court me properly, Emmett Pierce, but I should warn you, I am not the easiest person to be with. I am stubborn and opinionated, and I will not give up teaching even after I marry." "Would not expect you to," Emmett said. "And I can be stubborn too. We'll probably argue." "Probably," Willa agreed. "But I will never leave you behind," Emmett said, his voice turning serious. "That is a promise I can make and keep." Willa believed him. And that belief, that trust, felt more solid than any wedding vow she had almost spoken to Thomas. The courtship began slowly, properly, with Emmett calling on her at her parents' house on Sunday afternoons. They would sit on the porch, carefully chaperoned by her mother, who was always nearby, and talk for hours. Willa learned that Emmett had grown up in Nevada, that his parents had died when he was 16, and that he had been working ranches ever since. He had a dream of saving enough money to buy his own small piece of land, nothing fancy, just enough for some horses and cattle and a house. "Would be nice to have something that is truly mine," he said one afternoon, his hat turning in his hands. "Something permanent." "Do you ever get lonely?" Willa asked, "moving from ranch to ranch, never really settling?" Emmett considered the question carefully, as he did with everything. "Used to not mind it, but lately, yes. Been thinking it might be nice to have a home, a real home, with someone to share it with." He looked at her when he said it, and Willa felt warmth spread through her chest. She told him about her own dreams, about wanting to open a bigger school someday, maybe even write a book for children. She confessed her fear that she had almost married Thomas not out of love, but out of fear of being alone, of being seen as an old maid. "You were 22, Emmett said with a slight smile. "Hardly an old maid." "In a small town, opinions form quickly," Willa said. "Every girl I grew up with is married now. I felt like I was being left behind." "Better to be alone than with the wrong person," Emmett said. "And for what it is worth, I'm glad you did not marry him. Even if I feel guilty for being glad about something that hurt you." "It did hurt," Willa admitted, "but more because of how it happened than because I lost Thomas. I think I realized that day in the storm cellar that I had not really loved him. I loved the idea of being married, of having my life settled and planned, but I did not love him." "And now?" Emmett asked quietly. Willa met his eyes. "Now I think I'm beginning to understand what love actually feels like." Emmett reached out slowly and took her hand, right there on the porch with her mother watching from the window. His hand was rough with calluses from years of hard work, but his touch was gentle. "I am in love with you, Willa Catherine. I know it has only been a few weeks, but I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Willa's breath caught. She had never heard words spoken with such quiet certainty, such absolute honesty. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "It terrifies me." "Terrifies me too," Emmett admitted with a small smile. "But the good kind of terrified. The kind that means something real is happening." As summer progressed and Jamestown slowly rebuilt itself, Willa and Emmett's courtship deepened. He taught her to ride horses better, taking her out to the Patterson ranch where he still worked, now under the management of Mrs. Patterson's son, who had come from back east to take over. She showed him her favorite books, reading passages aloud while they sat under the big oak tree that had somehow survived the tornado. They had their first real argument in July when Emmett mentioned that the Patterson son was planning to sell the ranch and Emmett would need to find new work. Willa had suggested he find a job in town, maybe at the livery stable, so he could stay close. Emmett had bristled at the suggestion, saying he was not meant for town living, that he needed open spaces and the work he knew. "So what? You will just drift off to another ranch somewhere else?" Willa had demanded, fear making her voice sharp. "I am not drifting anywhere without you," Emmett had shot back, "but I will not give up who I am just to stay comfortable." They had parted ways angry, and Willa had spent a miserable night thinking she had ruined everything. But the next morning Emmett had shown up at her door early, hat in hand. "I am sorry," he said before she could speak. "I should not have gotten defensive. You were just trying to help." "I am sorry too," Willa said. "I was trying to control the situation instead of trusting you. What do you want to do?" They had talked it through calmly this time, and Emmett had explained that he had been saving money for years and was finally close to having enough for a down payment on some land. There is a property about 10 miles from here near the foothills. Small ranch house, good water, enough grazing land for a decent herd. I have been looking at it for months, but I was afraid to hope I could actually afford it." "Why were you afraid to tell me?" Willa asked. "Because it would mean asking you to marry me," Emmett said simply, "and I did not know if it was too soon, if you were ready, if you would say yes." Willa's heart felt like it might burst from her chest. "Are you asking me now?" Emmett took a deep breath and dropped to one knee right there on her front porch. He did not have a ring, but he took her hand in both of his. "Willa Catherine, I know it has only been 3 months. I know people will say we are rushing, but I have never been more certain of anything. I love you. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you see the world. I want to build a life with you, a real home. Will you marry me?" Willa pulled him to his feet and kissed him. Propriety be damned. Her mother gasped from inside the house, but Willa did not care. When she pulled back, she was smiling so wide her face hurt. "Yes, yes, I will marry you, Emmett Pierce." They decided to get married quickly and simply. Neither of them wanted a big ceremony, not after what had happened last time. They would go to the courthouse, get legally married by the justice of the peace, and then have a small celebration with close friends and family. But 3 days before they were supposed to go to the courthouse, a different idea came to Willa. She found Emmett working on the new property he had just purchased, repairing the fence line, and she stood at the edge of the field watching him work for a moment before calling out. He turned, saw her, and his whole face lit up in a way that never failed to make her heart skip. "What are you doing all the way out here?" "I had an idea," Willa said as he walked over, wiping sweat from his forehead. "About the wedding." "I thought we had it all planned. Simple ceremony at the courthouse." "I know, but I was thinking." Willa bit her lip. "The place we first realized we had feelings for each other, the place where you first told me you loved me in your actions, if not your words, was in that storm cellar. What if we got married there instead?" Emmett blinked in surprise. "In the storm cellar?" "I know it sounds strange," Willa said quickly, "but that place represents something important. It is where my old life ended and my new one began, where you saved me in more ways than one. I do not want a fancy church wedding anymore. I want something that means something real." Emmett was quiet for a moment, and then he started to laugh. Not mocking laughter, but genuine, joyful laughter. "Willa Catherine, you are the most surprising woman I have ever met. If you want to get married in a storm cellar, then that is exactly what we will do." They talked to Mrs. Henderson, who thought the idea was wonderfully romantic in an unconventional way. She helped them clean out the cellar, bringing down lanterns and even some wildflowers to brighten the earthen walls. Willa's mother was less enthusiastic, but eventually came around when she saw how happy Willa was. On a warm August afternoon, exactly 3 months after the tornado that had changed everything, Willa and Emmett gathered in the storm cellar with a small group of people. Willa's parents were there, along with Emmett's ranch boss and his wife, Mrs. Henderson, and a few close friends. The preacher from the surviving church came down the steps carefully, his Bible clutched in his weathered hands. Willa wore a simple yellow dress that she had made herself, practical and pretty. Emmett wore his best shirt and trousers, his hair still damp from where he had clearly dunked his head in the water trough to clean up. He looked nervous and hopeful, and so handsome that Willa felt her breath catch. The preacher smiled at them both. "This is certainly the most unusual venue I have ever had for a wedding, but I think perhaps the most meaningful. We gather here in this place of shelter and safety to join these two people in marriage. A marriage, like this cellar, should be a place of refuge in life's storms, a place where you protect each other, where you weather the hard times together." Willa felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. The preacher continued with the traditional vows, and when it came time for Emmett to speak, his voice was steady and sure. "I, Emmett Pierce, take you, Willa Catherine, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to stand beside you in all things, to protect you, to honor you, and to love you all the days of my life. I will never run from storms, literal or otherwise, as long as you are by my side. Willa's voice shook slightly when it was her turn, but she pushed through. I, Willa Catherine, take you, Emmett Pierce, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to build a life with you built on trust and honesty, to support your dreams as you support mine, and to love you with my whole heart for as long as I live. They had no rings, had decided to save the money for the ranch instead, but when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Emmett pulled a small item from his pocket. It was a horsehair bracelet, carefully braided in an intricate pattern with a small silver clasp. Made it myself, he said quietly, fastening it around her wrist. I know it is not much. It is perfect, Willa whispered, touching the bracelet with reverent fingers. It is from you, so it is perfect. They kissed there in the dim lamplight of the storm cellar, surrounded by the people who loved them, and Willa felt a profound sense of rightness. This was nothing like the wedding she had planned for Thomas. This was better. This was real. The celebration afterward was held in Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, with food that people had brought and music from the same fiddle player who had played at the gathering weeks ago. There was dancing and laughter, and when someone made a joke about the bride and groom literally weathering a storm together, everyone laughed. Thomas was notably absent, having left town a month earlier under unclear circumstances. Willa heard he had gone to San Francisco. She felt nothing when she heard the news, not even satisfaction. He was simply part of a past that no longer had any hold on her. That night, Willa and Emmett rode out to their new property together, to the small ranch house that would be their home. It needed work, needed cleaning and repairs and all the touches that would make it truly theirs, but it had a solid roof and a stone fireplace and windows that looked out over rolling hills. Emmett carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing at the tradition, and set her down gently in the main room. The moonlight streamed through the windows, providing enough light to see by. Welcome home, Mrs. Pierce, Emmett said softly, his arms still around her. Welcome home, Mr. Pierce, Willa replied, and kissed him. That night marked the beginning of their real life together. They fell into rhythms and routines, learning each other in the intimate ways that only married couples do. Emmett worked the ranch, starting with just a few head of cattle and some horses he knew how to train and sell. Willa continued teaching at the schoolhouse in town, riding in each morning and back each evening, her lessons and her students a joy she refused to give up. They had disagreements, of course. Emmett could be stubborn about accepting help, wanting to prove he could build their life with his own two hands. Willa sometimes got so absorbed in her teaching that she forgot to come home for supper, but they learned to talk through their problems, to listen to each other, to compromise. The first time they faced a real storm after getting married, Willa felt her chest tighten with old fear. She was in town teaching when the sky turned dark, and she rode home as fast as she could, her heart pounding. But when she reached the ranch, Emmett was already there, having seen the clouds and come to find her. Thought you might need me, he said simply, and they rode out the storm together in their own small cellar that Emmett had dug that summer, holding each other as the wind howled above. The seasons turned. Autumn came with its golden light and cool nights. Winter brought snow to the foothills, not deep, but enough to make the world quiet and beautiful. Spring arrived with wildflowers and newborn calves, and summer returned, hot and dry, a full year since the tornado that had changed everything. On the anniversary of that day, Willa and Emmett rode into town together. The church had been rebuilt, larger and sturdier than before. Main Street was fully restored with new buildings and even a few new businesses. The scars of the tornado were mostly healed, though everyone who had lived through it carried the memory. They visited the storm cellar behind the boarding house, and Mrs. Henderson came out to greet them with a knowing smile. Come to see where it all began? Something like that, Willa said, taking Emmett's hand. They climbed down into the cellar together, and Willa stood in the same spot where she had sat a year ago, soaking wet and heartbroken, her carefully planned life in ruins. She had felt so lost that day, so certain that the destruction of her wedding was the destruction of her future. What are you thinking? Emmett asked, his arm around her waist. "That I am grateful," Willa said honestly. "That tornado took away what I thought I wanted and gave me what I actually needed. It brought me you." Emmett kissed her temple. "I would not have wanted you to go through that pain, but I cannot regret where it led us." They stayed in the cellar for a little while longer, remembering and grateful, and then they climbed back out into the sunshine of a beautiful August day. 2 years into their marriage, Willa discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror, and when she told Emmett, he picked her up and spun her around despite her laughing protests. "We're going to be parents," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We're going to have a baby." The pregnancy was not easy. Willa was sick for the first few months, barely able to keep food down, and teaching became difficult. She finally had to take a leave from the schoolhouse when she was 6 months along, her belly too large to comfortably move around the classroom. She hated giving it up even temporarily, but Emmett promised her she could return after the baby was born if she wanted. "I will not ask you to give up who you are," he said firmly. "We will figure it out together." Their son was born in late winter of 1887 during a cold snap that kept everyone huddled around fires. The midwife from town came to help, and Willa labored for 16 hours before their baby finally arrived, screaming and red-faced and absolutely perfect. They named him Ethan Pierce, and from the moment Emmett held his son for the first time, Willa knew she had never seen a man more transformed by love. He was a devoted father, patient and gentle, waking with Willa for the night feedings even though he had to be up early for ranch work. "I want him to know I am here," Emmett said when Willa told him he should sleep. "I want him to always know his father is here." When Ethan was 6 months old, Willa returned to teaching part-time, bringing the baby with her on some days. The students loved having a baby in the classroom, and it became a learning opportunity as Willa taught them about child development and responsibility. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily. Emmett had a gift with horses, and word spread about his ability to gentle even the wildest animals. People started coming from surrounding towns to have him train their horses, and the extra income allowed them to buy more land, to expand the herd, to build a larger barn. When Ethan was 3, Willa gave birth to a daughter they named Eleanor. 2 years after that, another son, Samuel, arrived. The house that had once seemed too large for just 2 people was now filled with noise and laughter and the beautiful chaos of children. Willa opened a small school on their property for children from neighboring ranches who lived too far from town to attend the Jamestown school. She taught in the mornings, and local mothers took turns helping watch all the children in the afternoons. It was not the grand school she had once dreamed of, but it was hers, and she loved it. Emmett built a reputation as one of the best horsemen in the region. He never got rich, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. They had built exactly the life they wanted together, piece by piece. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Emmett surprised Willa by arranging for her parents to watch the children overnight. He took her back to town, to the boarding house, and Mrs. Henderson greeted them with a knowing smile. "Thought you might want to visit your special place," the older woman said. The storm cellar had become something of a legend in town, the place where the school teacher and the cowboy had gotten married during the summer of the great tornado. Young couples sometimes came to see it, touching the earthen walls as if some of Willa and Emmett's happiness might rub off on them. Willa and Emmett climbed down the steps together, and someone, probably Mrs. Henderson, had set up lanterns and scattered flower petals on the floor. It was sweetly romantic and completely unnecessary because Willa would have been happy in the plain old cellar. 10 years, Emmett said, pulling her close. 10 years since you stood in church in a white dress and I knew I had to save you. You did save me, Willa said, in every way that matters. You saved me too, Emmett replied. I was drifting before you, just going through the motions. You gave me a reason to stay in one place, to build something lasting. They kissed in the dim cellar, and Willa felt the same flutter in her chest that she had felt that first night when Emmett had asked to court her. 10 years of marriage had not diminished what they had. If anything, it had deepened it, adding layers of shared experience and mutual respect and hard-won understanding. "Do you ever regret it?" Willa asked. "The simple wedding, the hard years of building the ranch, the sacrifices we made?" Emmett shook his head. "Not for a single second. This life with you is everything I never knew I needed. You and our children are worth every struggle, every challenge, every moment." "I love you, Emmett Pierce," Willa said. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too, Willa Pierce, always and forever." They stayed in the cellar for a while longer, talking about their life, their children, their dreams for the future. Willa wanted to write that children's book she had once mentioned, now that she had years of teaching experience to draw from. Emmett was thinking about buying the adjoining property to expand the ranch, maybe even hiring a hand or two to help. When they finally emerged from the cellar, the night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds. They walked through town hand in hand, past the rebuilt church, past the schoolhouse where Willa had once taught, past the spot where the tornado had touched down and changed everything. "Sometimes I think about that day," Willa said, "about what my life would have been like if the tornado had never come, if I had married Thomas as planned." "And?" Emmett asked. "And I think I would have been miserable, comfortable maybe, but miserable. I would have spent my life wondering what I had missed. What could have been different if I'd been braver?" Emmett squeezed her hand. "You are the bravest person I know. You walked away from everything you thought you wanted to take a chance on something unknown." "I took a chance on you," Willa corrected, "and it was the best decision I ever made." The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. Ethan grew into a serious boy who loved books and learning, eventually going away to school in Sacramento to study law. Eleanor was wild and free, helping her father with the horses and insisting she would never leave the ranch. Samuel was the peacemaker, always finding ways to make people laugh, to smooth over conflicts. Willa's small ranch school gained a reputation for excellence, and she eventually wrote that children's book, a simple story about a girl who learned to ride horses. It was published by a small press in San Francisco and sold modestly, but holding that first copy in her hands made Willa cry with pride. Emmett's ranch became one of the most successful in the region. He was known for fair dealing and quality animals, and young men came from all over to learn horse training from him. He taught them not just the technical skills, but the patience and respect required to truly work with animals. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party at the ranch. The whole town came, and people told stories about the legendary Cellar wedding, about the couple who had built a life from nothing, about the love that had grown from disaster. Thomas Whitmore's name was mentioned once by someone who did not know better, and the conversation quickly moved on. He had become a footnote in the story, a cautionary tale about what could have been, rather than a real person who had once hurt Willa deeply. When everyone had left and the children were finally in bed, Willa and Emmett sat on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the land they had built together. Willa's hair had threads of silver now, and Emmett's face was weathered from years of outdoor work. But when they looked at each other, they saw past the aging, past the changes time had wrought, to the essential truth that had never changed. 25 years, Willa said softly, half my life spent with you. The best half, Emmett said, and Willa laughed. The best half, she agreed. Their hands found each other automatically, fingers interlacing in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. The horsehair bracelet Emmett had given her on their wedding day was still on her wrist, worn smooth by time but never removed. Do you remember what you said to me that night after the gathering at the saloon? Willa asked. When you first told me you had feelings for me? I said a lot of things that night, Emmett replied with a small smile. You said I deserved someone who would stand beside me when things got hard, Willa said. You have done that every single day for 25 years. When I was sick during the pregnancies, when we lost the entire calf crop that one terrible winter, when my father died and I thought I would never stop crying, you have always stood beside me. And you have stood beside me, Emmett said, when the drought nearly broke us, when I got thrown from that stallion and broke my ribs, when I doubted whether I could make this ranch work. You never lost faith in me, even when I lost faith in myself." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge. The same stars that had shone down on them 10, 20, 25 years ago. The same stars that would continue shining long after they were gone, watching over their children and their children's children. "Do you ever wonder what happened to Thomas?" Emmett asked suddenly. Willa considered the question. "Sometimes. I heard years ago that he married someone in San Francisco, had a few children. I hope he's happy. I hope he learned to be a better man." "You are generous to hope that," Emmett said. "I can afford to be generous," Willa replied. "He gave me the greatest gift, even if he did not mean to. He showed me what I did not want, which helped me recognize what I did want when it appeared. I might never have given you a chance if I had not first seen what a mistake I was making with Thomas." "I am glad you gave me a chance," Emmett said, his voice rough with emotion. "I am glad you took a risk on a cowboy with nothing to his name but a dream and a promise." "You had more than that," Willa said firmly. "You had honor and kindness and strength. You had everything that mattered." They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity, knowing each other's bodies as well as they knew their own, finding pleasure and comfort and connection in the intimate darkness. 25 years had not diminished their desire for each other, had not made their physical relationship routine or boring. If anything, the deep emotional bond they had forged made every touch more meaningful. The seasons continued their eternal rotation. Autumn, winter, spring, summer, each bringing its own rhythms and demands. The children grew and began their own lives. Ethan became a lawyer in Sacramento but came home often, eventually bringing a wife with him. Eleanor married a neighboring rancher and stayed close, raising her own children just a few miles away. Samuel went east for a few years working on the railroad, but eventually returned to help Emmett run the ranch. Willa kept teaching until she was well into her 60s, finally retiring when her eyes started to fail and reading became difficult. But she never stopped learning, never stopped being curious about the world. She listened to her children and grandchildren read to her, absorbing stories and knowledge like a sponge. Emmett worked the ranch until his body simply could not do it anymore, until his joints ached too much and his breath came too hard. He handed the daily operations over to Samuel, but he still went out every day to check on the horses, to run his weathered hands over their necks and whisper to them in the soft voice he had always used with animals. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children arranged for them to renew their vows. Not in the storm cellar this time, they were too old to manage the steep steps, but in the ranch house they had built together, surrounded by children and grandchildren and a few old friends who remained. The same preacher who had married them all those years ago had long since passed away, but his son, who had been a boy at that first wedding, stood before them now with his own Bible and his own gentle smile. 40 years, he said, looking at Willa and Emmett with something like awe. 40 years of marriage, built on a foundation of trust and love that began in the most unlikely of circumstances. You two have shown this community what real commitment looks like, what real love looks like. Emmett, his voice still strong despite his age, repeated the vows he had spoken 4 decades earlier. "I, Emmett Pierce, promise to stand beside you in all things, to protect you, to honor you, and to love you all the days of my life. I will never run from storms as long as you are by my side." Willa, her voice wavering slightly but her words clear, spoke her own vows. "I, Willa Pierce, promise to build a life with you built on trust and honesty, to support your dreams as you support mine, and to love you with my whole heart for as long as I live." When they kissed, their grandchildren cheered and clapped, and Willa felt tears stream down her weathered cheeks, happy tears, grateful tears. Tears for the life they had built, for the love that had sustained them through 4 decades of joy and sorrow, triumph and struggle. That night, lying in bed with Emmett's arms around her as they had been for 40 years, Willa thought about the girl she had been at 22, standing in a church in a white dress, so certain she knew what her life should look like, so afraid of not meeting expectations, of not following the path everyone assumed she would follow. That tornado had ripped away all her carefully laid plans, had destroyed the future she thought she wanted, and in doing so it had given her the space to choose a different path, to choose Emmett, to choose love over security, authenticity over expectation, courage over comfort. "What are you thinking about?" Emmett murmured sleepily. "About how grateful I am," Willa whispered, "for the tornado, for the storm cellar, for you coming back for me, for every moment that led us here." "Even the hard moments?" Emmett asked. "Especially the hard moments," Willa said. "They taught us we could weather anything together. They proved that what we have is real and lasting." Emmett kissed her forehead. "I love you, Willa Pierce. I have loved you from the moment I saw you standing lost in that church. I will love you in whatever comes next." "I love you too," Willa said. "Always and forever." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, two souls who had found each other in the chaos of a storm and built a lifetime of love from that chance encounter. Years later, when Willa and Emmett had both passed on peacefully and within months of each other, their children found a letter Willa had written to be read after her death. In it, she told the story of the tornado, of the ruined wedding, of Emmett coming back for her when everyone else had run. She wrote about the storm cellar wedding, about the years of building their ranch and raising their family, about every precious moment of their 45 years together. At the end of the letter, she had written, "I planned a wedding to one man and ended up married to another in a storm cellar during a disaster. At the time, I thought my life was ruined, but I was wrong. My life was not ruined that day. It was saved. Emmett Pierce saved me from a life of comfort without love, security without passion, safety without growth. He gave me a life of adventure and challenge and deep, abiding love. We weathered many storms together, both literal and figurative, and we came through them all stronger. If I could go back and change anything, I would not. Every moment, even the painful ones, led me to exactly where I was meant to be. Trust in the storms, my children and grandchildren. Trust that sometimes life tears apart what you think you want to make room for what you actually need. And when someone comes back for you, when someone chooses to stand beside you in the darkness, hold on to them. Build a life with them. Love them with your whole heart. That is what your grandfather did for me, and that love sustained us for a lifetime. I die grateful, fulfilled, and deeply, deeply loved." The letter was passed down through generations, becoming part of the family's origin story. The ranch continued to operate, though it changed hands and purposes over the years. The storm cellar behind the boarding house in Jamestown became a historical landmark, with a plaque that told the story of the couple who married there during the Great Tornado of 1884. And sometimes on warm August nights when the wind picked up and storm clouds gathered on the horizon, people swore they could feel something special in that old cellar. A sense of peace, of love, of two souls who had found each other in the chaos and built something beautiful that lasted beyond their mortal lives. The story of Willa and Emmett became legend in Jamestown, told and retold, embellished and remembered. But at its core, it remained a simple truth that sometimes the greatest loves come from the greatest disasters, and that real love means standing beside someone when everything else is falling apart. Their legacy lived on in their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, all of whom carried the knowledge that love could bloom in the darkest places, that courage could be found in moments of fear, and that sometimes the best things in life came from the ruins of what we thought we wanted. The tornado had taken away a wedding, but it had given Willa and Emmett each other, and that trade, painful as it was in the moment, had been worth everything.